All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Craig. Next item that was pulled from the consent was item 7AD. And with us to walk us through this journey is our Director of Public Works, Steve Lederer, and our Concessionaires Manager, Ms. Lee Sears. Yes, Sears. I know. 2 Lee S's in your department. We've got to keep them straight.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I will start off. There were a number of requests for this item to be pulled. Perhaps if we can start off, Mr. Lederer, with an overview of how we got here, and then we can take up any questions from the board, and then we'll listen to public comment.
Exactly. Thank you, Chair Ramos. Members of the board, Steve Lederer, Public Works Director, here with Lee Sears, our Lake Berryessa Concessions Manager. I am going to give an update of how we got to where we are, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who's going to talk a little bit about the specific proposal that Margaritaville put forward for the Steel Canyon Resort. So going back not all the way to the beginning, that would be 1957, I'm going to jump to in the late teens here, 2017, 2018, the Bureau of Reclamation, the BOR, or the feds, had made many attempts to redevelop the resorts at the lake, and we're here talking specifically about Steel Canyon, but the other resorts as well. And this board offered to the BOR for the county to take over that resort development, control of that activity, and we signed an agreement in February of 2020 with the BOR to take over that development. The board voiced an interest in controlling the development of the resorts. In 2021, the Board of Supervisors and county staff released a request for proposal, an RFP, for developers and operators for the various resorts. There were 3 submitters for the Steel Canyon Resort. There were submitters on the other resorts as well, but again, we're not here to talk about those today. So there, the 3 submitters on the Steel Canyon Resort were Sun, Margaritaville, and Suntex. The staff evaluating the RFP determined that Sun was the best proposal. We brought that to the board, and the board signed a exclusive negotiating agreement, an ENA, with Sun. And that ENA process is exactly what we're here to do today. Sun worked under that ENA for a couple of years, and then, as the board knows, in March of this year, for various reasons, Sun backed out of the agreement. Staff at board direction continued with the process, and we went to our number 2 proposer for steel, which was Margaritaville. So Margaritaville was still, even though 2 years had gone by, Margaritaville was still interested in moving forward with an ENA, an exclusive negotiating agreement, and that's what brought us here today. Margaritaville is a nationally known and operating operator of resorts, not surprisingly by its name, founded by the late, great Jimmy Buffett. They are working with, and I may get the pronunciation, YTIM Napa LLC, which is a developer working with Margaritaville on this. This is the same process that we did do at all the other resorts. I mentioned the name Suntex. Suntex actually won the contract, or the ENA, for the Berryessa Point. They are about 18 months or so into that process, 12 to 18 months into that process. They're working on their design, they're working on their environmental, and we're very hopeful that in the not too near future that, not next week and not next month, but in the near future that we'll be bringing an actual concession agreement to the board for Suntex and Berryessa Point. As it happens, Suntex is also operating Pleasure Cove. Let's see. I did get one question on the environmental process. As has happened with the other resorts, the process is set up so that the developer, as they in the process of developing their process, will be doing an EIR process as they do their development. There is one difference, if you will, as opposed to like a typical winery project, and this is mentioned in the staff report. On the typical winery process, ordinarily county staff either does or controls or has the direct contracts with the environmental, the EIR provider, the EIR consultants. For most of those projects, for instance, when a winery comes to the county, the project comes to us, what I'll say about 80, 90% baked, if you will. There's a property owner, they've been on the property, they know what buildings, they know what they want to do. In this process here, although if you will, the boundaries of the project are very well defined by the record of decision, the ROD that the BOR passed, which also then mirrors our own RFP. The reality is the developer in this case has really only studied the site to the point of making the proposal. So this design, if you will, is probably 15 to 20% baked as opposed to a typical winery process. So as such, as the developer moves forward, it's kind of an iterative process between designing environmental study, modifying, designing environmental study. So it's important in this case that the environmental team be embedded with the design team. That doesn't mean that the county won't have interaction with the environmental consultants. It doesn't mean that we don't have control and oversight of their work products, and obviously staff and ultimately the board have final approval of those work products. But it's just, it's a slightly different process than what we normally see, like I said, with kind of the typical winery that comes to us, which is why we are proposing to do the environmental the way we are. And as I mentioned, it's consistent with what we've done for all the other developers as well. This is what Suntex is doing right now and have been doing for the last 18 months. And again, part of the reason for doing that is, although speed is not the most important thing we're doing here, the speed is of some essence. Here we did sign an agreement with the BOR indicating that we would move forward. They're actually paying for half of our costs for a period of time, but that expires. And if we don't continue to move forward, they'll first off, they'll stop paying half our expenses because that does expire, and also at some point they'll just take the resorts back if we don't move forward. It's an important because this board has made a commitment to the community to revitalize that area. We've certainly heard many comments over the years about how important it is to get the resorts back up and operating. It's important to the Napa Berryessa Resort Improvement District, the water wastewater system that's out there. The developer will pay fees, impact fees, or do what's necessary such that what's needed to operate the resort will be paid for by the resort. So from that standpoint, it's not a panacea to all of the water wastewater problems out there. But essentially, the resort will act as almost as many accounts as exist right now. So you have 385 some odd parcels out there that are paying for Enbrid's operations. You bring the resort on, that number equivalent goes way, way up. So you have many more payers amortizing the fixed costs. So there's a net benefit to the district, and there's a net benefit to the ratepayers who are paying for the district. And finally, from the county side, as I said, right now we are a cost center. The feds are paying for part of our costs, but we're paying for the rest of it. And the sooner we can get up and operating and start receiving revenue from the resorts, we'll become, I was going to say profit center, which is not really true, but we'll become a revenue center. And that revenue not only goes to covering the county costs, but goes to benefits out there, including supporting a new police station, improved fire services, perhaps roads. If I mentioned roads would be a good place to put some of that money. So like I said, speed is not the only thing we're doing here, but speed is relevant to this discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who's going to talk a little bit about the specific proposal that Margaritaville has put forward.
Can you hear me? There you go. So I think you guys have the proposal in front of you to look at. So they were our number 2 in this RFP process back in 2021. And in their proposal, I think the total amount of money invested proposed was roughly around $95 million, and they'll do all of the infrastructure upgrades and tie into Inbred as another customer. They will turn steel back into sort of the resort it used to be back in the day. We'll have, I think, about a 50-slip marina. We'll have gas docks, restaurants, RV parking, cabins. It'll be sort of a nice resort once it's up and operating. It is a franchise, so it will have the Margaritaville brand, and that will be approved by the BOR as well. They have seen this proposal and have blessed it as well. Any questions?
Supervisor Gallagher.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Can you tell us why Margaritaville came in second originally, and maybe what were the detracting factors, and have you talked to them about those, and are those things that will be changed or rectified in this going forward period?
Yes, there weren't any sort of major factors. It was a scoring system. Steve was on the board with me as well. There was a scoring system for all of the bids that came in, and this scoring system was from, I think, what was it? Operating infrastructure, investment.
Yeah, there was a series. We're going back 3 years now.
I know, it's been a while.
Yeah, but it was how much were they investing? There was kind of an overall aesthetics score. There was a financial qualification score. Did they actually have the financial backing to do what they said they were going to do? There was a previous experience score. I think those were the main ones. And I will say, as I remember, that all 3 of the bids were pretty close. We were really happy with all 3 of them. That wasn't the case actually with some of the other resorts. We got some bids that were like, that ain't going to work.
Yeah, so they met like a minimum standard for you.
Yeah, but all 3 were pretty close. I think I'm pretty sure we were unanimous at the time,
They
but
were, right.
they were all pretty close.
Extremely. So there wasn't like a negative factor on one as opposed to another. It was just sort of the overall scoring based on everyone's opinion. And they came in within, a few points of each other. So there wasn't a
Okay, thanks.
a negative factor.
The Margaritaville properties that I've been looking at online are they're very large. They have a lot of accessory structures, big centers for events and whatnot. Can you give us any comparison to what they're proposing as opposed to other properties that they have, and how much control do we have over the scale of this?
It's not going to have, I think, a convention center or anything like that. It's still an RV camping, glamping site. There'll be a restaurant. There'll be a 50-slip marina, roughly, gas station. There'll be a little convenience store. And the BOR also has to approve the final design build plan for this as well. And so it'll have to fit on the site as it is. I don't think there's going to be any issues with size as opposed to it being sort of a bigger site as opposed to what it used to be on that site back in 2010. So it'll stay fairly, it'll fit the site itself. And I think in the proposal, it'll sort of show you the layout of how many cabins there'll be and how many RV sites there'll be and the restaurant itself.
In terms of also the question of control, so what we're doing today is, like I said, an exclusive negotiating agreement. What that essentially says is we won't go talk to anybody else. It doesn't bind us to say yes at the end. It doesn't bind them to go forward with it either. But it does lock us in as partners. We do have control in the sense that the original BOR record of decision, if you will, sets a box around because there was an environmental study that was done associated with that. Our own RFP set something of a box. But besides that, there is some amount of flexibility, if you will. Obviously, I say obviously, perhaps the bigger it gets, there could be financial benefits and a certain scale that comes with that. The board, might want to see something smaller, but if we get too small, it won't pencil anymore either. So we're not locked into a specific number of cabins or a specific number of slips. There's a high and a low. There's a box there. But there is, again, this is a negotiating agreement. It's not a final operating agreement. So the board still does have discretion to influence. I hope that answers the question.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you. Supervisor Gregory?
Thank you, Chair. A few things. Just for context, can you just tell us the status of the other concession areas?
Yes, sure. So Steel Canyon and Spanish Flat right now are under an interim concession agreement. So those two sites will be operating through this process until their environmental studies are done and they start breaking ground. Berryessa Point is with Suntex. They are about a year and a half, year and 12 months, a year and 6 months, somewhere around there. In their environmental studies, they should be breaking ground sometime next year, hopefully, end of next year. Monticello did go out for bid. We did get one proposal, and we're sort of in negotiating status with them right now, looking at their development and sort of where we are with that. And then we will eventually go with an ENA with them as well.
And which areas does Suntex have tied up?
Suntex has Berryessa Point, and they have Pleasure Cove. Now, Pleasure Cove, Markley Cove, and Puda Canyon are still under Fed oversight. I think in the MPA, Napa County gets all 7 of the sites. Right now, I have 4 of them. And so those other 3 I will take within the next, I think, 5 to 6 years is when those get turned over to Napa County.
Okay, thank you. So if we're out for bid on Monticello, did we consider going out to bid for this one?
No, because in our RFP process, Sun was number 1, and so then we'd have to look at number 2 and 3 before we would go back out to RFP. So we have to sort of stay within the process of the RFP process that we did back in 2021. So Margaritaville was our number 2. We
have to? What says?
I think that's part of the RFP process as we sort of follow those guidelines.
Director Letter?
It was the process we chose to take. If the board, for instance, if the board were to reject this agreement today, like I said, the third bidder was Suntex. They already have the 2 sites. We're not interested in one developer controlling too many sites, so then we would be back at an RFP process.
Right. Just concerned that we're tying ourselves to this for 24 months, this exclusive negotiating period.
So that gives them the right to do all their environmental studies.
Yeah, it's a long time, and the way that the due diligence would go, being controlled by the developer, I would guess it's even more proprietary than the last time we went through this. So it's potential we take 24 months, can't get there, and all the progress made we don't get access to. Due diligence comes with a lot of effort and work and deliverables, and it can carry forward if it's shared along the way. So I'm just a little concerned about that. That's it for now. Thanks.
Well, just just a thought on that is, we did receive a good deal of the work that Sun did
That's right.
during their period, so that was beneficial. And you're correct, we're tying ourselves to this group, but if we went out to an RFP process and chose somebody, we would be
The same.
tying ourselves to that, so it's the same process. And I had another brilliant point, but it left me.
And the
so.
24 months, just to be sure, it's an 18-month, they have a 6-month extension, and in that time, Margaritaville has been given, any of the sites, same with SunTax, any of the studies that were done by Sun that could be beneficial, that they'd already spent all this money on and spent all this time on, had been given to these developers so that it could further along their process and speed it up a little bit and sort of get them breaking ground, which is the goal. And that's the goal with the feds as well. I mean, it's a 5-year agreement, and we're 3 years in.
Yeah, I did actually remember the other point that I was going to make. When we went out for the RFP the first time, I mentioned, it was 2020. Interest rates were low. Yes, I mean, COVID was happening, but when we went out with the RFP, I think we had 3, 4, 5. We had 6 or 7, I think, individual bidders on the various sites. The bidding atmosphere, if you will, is dramatically different today primarily because of interest rates and construction costs and whatnot. So when we went out for RFP on Monticello, we only had 1. So I guess what I'm saying is I think we have a qualified bird in hand, and I'm not sure that going out for RFP would dramatically change that flock at this point.
Any other questions, Supervisor Gregory? No. Okay. Supervisor Pedrosa.
Thank you, Chair. And are representatives from Margaritaville here?
Yes.
Okay. So, look, I'm having flashbacks of all the monthly meetings Supervisor Dillon and I were on to reach this point and trying to manage expectations. And not a lot of folks believe that we would get here, and we are. So, to me, I look at anyone that wants to do business in this area as an incredible opportunity to make sure it's done fair, responsibly, and it's a win-win. And I think that's what we've been committed to. What I see here is I think it's a good proposal. I'm interested in learning more. I think we have to balance flexibility with the economics of someone wanting to do business. We've done this dance before, and there have been times when it doesn't reach a good outcome. And I want to make sure that as we're doing this, community meetings in Lake Berryessa have to be critical, because we get Supervisor, I think Controller and I get a lot of questions when folks don't know what's going on. There's a lot of anxiety around it. I think this is not mass scale development. I think this is appropriate development with the recreational component, which I think complements Napa Valley very well. So I'm not interested in starting over. I want to continue this. I think it allows us to understand each other a little bit more. But again, the community outreach and touch point, I think it's going to be very key. And we also know that we have some very severe infrastructure challenges in Lake Berryessa. Some of us that we've had to provide loans for. We've identified resort development, recreational development as a way to also bridge that gap. So I think there's a lot of benefits to continue down this path. But if the representatives from Margaritaville are here, it would be great to hear from them a little bit, to hear their excitement, what their visions are. If the chair, through the chair, if that's appropriate, I think that would be good to hear.
Yes.
Sit here. Do you have another chair? I'll come over here. You two sit here. I'll introduce. This is Tim Wilkins.
Good morning. We formed a relationship with Margaritaville 4 years ago with the anticipation of them expanding in California. We have done a number of projects here locally, which several of you are aware of. And we just think that Margaritaville is just a good fit for Lake Berryessa. It's not an auberge. It's not a Best Western. It's just a nice middle road type of operation that we think is, a good fit. Here with me, too, is a gentleman from JLL who's providing the financing. So we can represent to you that we've got a qualified development team. George Gervin has been selected as the resort designer, and he's known worldwide for some of his projects and developments, and be happy to answer any specific questions you have.
Just on the financing, because someone mentioned rates. Rates are cyclical, but in terms of for you all, I'm assuming you have the financial wherewithal to weather a high rate environment, even if there's another rate shock.
In the last 3 months, we've closed in excess of $40 million of construction financing loans on other projects.
Good. And again, if you are selected and this materializes, my expectation is that you also have community meetings and you touch base with the community, because there is a lot of interest from neighbors there that want to be part of this experience as well.
Yeah, I've lived in Napa for 25 years and have been involved. I oversaw the grand jury for 5 years. I coached youth sports teams. We've given out scholarships.
Awesome.
We're a pretty well-known quantity.
Well, thank you for being interested.
Thank you.
Those are my questions.
Supervisor Cottrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Mr. Wilkins for being here. It's learning about this, and I appreciate Supervisor Pedrosa's point about a lot of meetings that you and Supervisor Dillon have spent getting us to this point. So I'm just looking at the numbers to familiarize myself with the scale of it a little bit. So maybe I'll start there. Well, first of all, actually, I think I'll go back and say you mentioned that you have done different projects in the local community. So could you tell us a little bit about the background and maybe some successful completed
The largest
projects?
one I was involved with was the Meritage. I think, actually, Ryan, you were the engineer that worked with us on you did a lot of work with us on the project itself when we were partnering with Shell Vacations. We did River Point, which is a vacation club project. I did the original permitting on Calistoga Ranch with Rob Caldwell and Joe Peakman. We've done, I did the Southern Crossing office complex. We did the Venture Commerce Center down at the Corporate Park. We did the townhouse project on California Boulevard. I mean, we've been, like I said, we've been actively involved in the community for over 20 years.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate hearing that. And, also building on what Supervisor Perdoza said about the need for kind of ongoing communication with the community there, I think would be really important. So I'm happy to hear that. And then back to Steve and Lee, one of the things, as I'm looking at the numbers here, it's a proposal, and as I understand, you're saying these things aren't cast in stone. This is an initial proposal that could shift. 175 one-bedroom cottages of park model, and then 150 one-bedroom bungalow cottages, and then 100 two-bedroom bungalow cottages. Can you help us kind of compare and contrast that to the previous project?
Previous project in reference to
Sun, yes.
It's similar.
Yeah.
Because it has to fit. Besides, the feds have to approve it as well. It has to. I'm sorry. It has to fit sort of the footprint that was previously there. The feds want that, and so do we. It's easier in the NEPA CEQA process for them if they sort of stay within the same footprint that was previously there. It helps with everything to get approved, and so I think all of their models are in.
Yeah, that model is 3 years old, so everything's going to be reevaluated and updated and probably improved. The other important element, too, is we're planning on putting up to 100% of employee housing on site.
Yeah, I noticed that call out for employee housing. I appreciate that because that will be really important over there. And then I guess the other question, and this is for you, Steve, you mentioned that if we take this step forward today, then we're committing to an exclusive negotiating process. And at the same time, I think what you described is that the Whitem would go off and work on its design and work on its environmental. What kind of active negotiation touch points do you see the board or the county having over that time? And if we've got this concern about making sure we're staying in the loop, could we build in a few midpoint check-ins along the way?
Yeah. So just to jump back 2 or 3 questions, I will say what is being proposed here is dramatically smaller than what was there in 2000 whatever when the previous resort shut down. That'll be the case on all the sites. Those sites were
Huge.
dramatically overbuilt. and this is way smaller than that. So in terms of check-in, Lee actually, I mean, she lives here at Napa, but she pretty much lives at the lake and lives with the developer. She's on the sites, I mean, every week regularly, and is talking with the developers on a regular basis. So from a staff standpoint, the interaction is relatively constant, really.
It's in the ENA as well, that they have to give updates.
Say that in the microphone, Lee.
In the ENA, it does state that all of the developers, so including Suntax as well, has to give updates, whether they're quarterly, monthly, just depending on whatever milestone they've hit. They either let me know.
Yeah, and we could certainly come back to the board, say, I don't know, every 6 months or 9 months or something like that, and provide an update to the board on all the sites, just kind of the status. Could be a written update. Maybe we just, could be a written update. We could come back and do something like this. Whatever's kind of necessary to just kind of keep the board in the loop.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think you've heard this from the other board members too, that it's so important for our community to have this project or a project going forward at Berryessa. It's meaningful for our investment in all the infrastructure there and helping residents out there too. So, but what I don't want to have happen is that we don't have enough touch points along the way so that we, are not tracking and providing input along the way.
Right. You don't want us to show up with a fully baked pie that you don't like, right? So neither do we.
Okay. I think that's a lot of feedback from the board. Don't see any other questions from the board at this time. I'll open public comment on item 7AD.
I'm Carol Coonsey. I live in Berryessa Highlands. I've been there since 1996. I need some clarification on one point. Could I ask Steve a question?
You can go ahead, do your public comment, and then the board can direct staff to answer a
Okay.
question if necessary. Thank you.
Well, the general plan distinguishes between nature-based and urban recreation. Nature-based recreation takes place in nature. It's significantly focused on the natural environment, and it includes walking, hiking, basically all of that stuff, swimming, camping in tents, rustic cabins. Urban recreation includes recreation that takes place in highly improved parks and recreational facilities. And some of the items that they list as indicative of being urban recreation is the issues of courts, like the pickleball courts that they want and the volleyball courts and the bocce ball courts, paved walking paths, and swimming pools. But the issue that I find sort of hits me in the face that indicates that it's urban is the density. So they're looking for 565 dwelling units, including the units for employees. And that just doesn't seem like nature-based recreation to me. And the general plan has long considered Lake Berryessa a nature-based destination. So, for instance, in the economic development section of the general plan, it says that critical to the economic future of the lake area, the quality of the new federal concessions to be opened within the next 2 years, developing facilities to support a new focus on nature-based recreation, improving public access to the thousands of acres of public land, and protecting the natural resources that attract visitors, including the scenic views of the hills and the ridges. But I see what this proposal means is to become a destination resort itself, and the destination is no longer really Lake Berryessa and nature-based recreation. And I'm wondering if, was there some policy change that I'm not familiar with? One of the goals of the economic section is to promote Lake Berryessa as a water and nature-based recreation area. So I'm kind of confused, really, what this is all about. Do I need to stop?
Yes, your 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
Okay.
If you'd like, you can send an email to the board with follow-up.
Okay.
Next speaker, please.
Kelly Anderson, Angwin. I did read the staff report, and I had a number of questions and comments. The link, there was a live link that would take one to see some of the cabins or the cottages, and that was not functioning. I am curious, I learned a little bit during the Eco Village and Angwin process about someone coming forward and gaining entitlements, and after they got the entitlement, then going out and trying to bring in a developer or a contractor to do the work. And I understand that maybe that's the case here. So I'm wondering what assurance or agreement, and maybe it's available to you and it's proprietary, but what do we know about this Margaritaville brand that assures us that they're interested in going forward should this gentleman get the entitlement here today? Do we know that that is going to happen? The prospectus mentioned some things that I think stand correcting. It said 70 to 80 people a weekend were arrested in Lake Berryessa, like routinely. There may have been one or two concerts back in the days when something happened, but 70 to 80 people being arrested, that is incorrect. There's a lot of effort by the Sheriff's Department to monitor drinking and make the lake safe. We do know that. But the concept also of creating a substation there, kind of what the Eco Village said they were going to do in Angwin. So you have to be careful of, like, the carrots that they're putting out there. Are they real? The Berryessa Snow Mountain National Conservation Area, that is hundreds, if not thousands of acres, if not a million now, is the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Conservation Area. I agree with Carol that we should be drawing people to the lake, to the nature-based activities, and not to a theme park. The very idea of something called Margaritaville in Napa County is kind of cringy. So this project proposes 400 or 500 units, and then RV parks, and then housing for workers, and that is one resort. So if we extrapolate that, and I don't know what the level of intensity is at others, but there could be a lot of development out there in a world where we need to get smaller and slower and quieter and more gentle. And this seems to just be driving a Las Vegas-style theme park in a rural area of the county where we should be walking quietly on earth. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Tamarisk. I live out in Circle Oaks. I've lived there for over 30 years. And you all have mentioned the economic problems out at Lake Berryessa, and indeed they are true. When we, for example, moved in, Moscow White Corners had a church, a gas station, a bar and grill, a restaurant, a post office, all gone, all gone. Spanish Flat, general store, restaurant, all gone. The only thing that's thriving out there is, can anyone name it? Turtle Rock. God bless Turtle Rock. Okay. So it's been an economically devastated area since the resorts have closed, and certainly help needs to happen. I am blown away by the size of this. We're talking about over 500 between the 100 RV and over 400 cottage abodes. We're talking about over 500. Just to give you an example of scale, Meritage has 322 rooms. Archer has less than 200. Okay, so we're talking about something that's bigger than either of those. So I think, and again, we're talking about a theme park. We're talking about people going in and having all of their needs met right there. So my question is, how will that help to revitalize the economy of Lake Berryessa, other than providing a few jobs for, say, housekeepers or waiters or whatever? So I think it's really important what y'all, especially Board Member Pedroza has mentioned, the community outreach to find out how our entrepreneurs, our local potential entrepreneurs and community members out in the Lake Berryessa area feel what they need to help them get up their mom and pop operations again. But once again, the idea of having probably around 1,500 to 2,000 people out there at that one resort on the weekend, living in cottages, or that's a city. That's not rural recreation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Mike Hackett from Angwin. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this issue. I am just blown away, I guess because I spent a lot of my life looking down at things from high altitude. I've never seen a project that is less ready for your vote than this one in the last 10 years. You have not done due diligence on the developers, and I'd also say there's one very important message here, and you need to each ask yourselves, has there ever been a better decision made when you're rushed to make that decision? I can't think of a one. In addition, although I primarily have been working with Save Napa Valley Foundation on environmental issues, development of wineries and vineyards, working with Center for Biological Diversity and Water Audit California, we have discovered in our investigations of every single staff development proposal large omissions and faulty work. And I see the same thing happening here. I don't know if this will be a good proposal or not, but being a person that loves Napa Valley and have lived here most of my adult life and raised my kids here, this is way, way too large. This is this is a development for the lake, not for a destination for a lot of people to sing Jimmy Buffett. Since his name was brought up, I'll bring it up again, but he's passed away. I just want my opinion to be in the record that you are not ready to make a decision on this, and it is very clear to me. Thank you.
Next public comment. See no other public comment in the boardroom. I'll turn to the phone lines. Thank you. I'll close public comment and I'll bring it back to the board, and I'll just reemphasize that I'll allow it.
Elaine?
Hello, this is Elaine.
You have 3 minutes for public comment. Please proceed.
Can you hear us?
Hello?
Go ahead, Elaine. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, hello, this is Elaine DeMann. I'm a biologist, a naturalist, and I am a Jimmy Buffett fan. Nevertheless, I have a huge problem with such a trendy concept as Margaritaville, which does indeed make me cringe. How long will that brand be desirable? I'd stay away from this one. And don't rush into this. Times have changed. Put it out to bid again and see if we can get something that's more in keeping with a nature-based concept. We're all going to have to live with this for a long, long time. Please don't rush this through. It's worth getting it right. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Let me confirm. Not for this item.
We will close public comment and we will bring it back to the board now for discussion and decision. And as I was starting to say, Just to reiterate, this is not a development project that is before us. This is an exclusive negotiation agreement to determine, in fact, what that project would be if the board decides to move forward. So I think in this circumstance, certainly the words do matter, as what is only being asked of us is whether we want to enter into negotiations in an exclusive negotiation with WITIM Napa LLC. Supervisor Pedrosa.
Look, Chair, I think you summed it up, very well. This is continuing the conversation to see if we can find a win-win for our community. So I do support, going forward. And I agree, words matter. And I'm having a hard time accepting that we're rushing into a decision when we've been having this conversation publicly multiple times. We've had community meetings. I know I've hosted community meetings in Berryessa. My colleague, Supervisor Dillon, before hosted community meetings in Berryessa. I know Supervisor Cottrell and I have had numerous conversations around the state of Berryessa. And when I look at the proposal, I see an ability to recreate with nature, to experience it. I don't see mass-scale development. I don't see 7-story hotels. So I think we have to make sure that we're being true and we're not using scare tactics here, because this is a community that has been asking us for multiple years. We've gone to Washington, D.C. together talking about this, and here we are presenting the community an opportunity to continue the dialogue. Whether we make the deal or not is to be determined. I hope we can reach that point, but we have to talk about the specifics and how Napa County benefits from your opportunity to do business here. So I see this as an opportunity, but we got to make sure that we're sticking to the facts, right? And I think there's a lot of people in Berryessa that I personally talked to, that I represent, that are hoping that we can continue this journey to make sure that we do something that is benefiting not just Berryessa, but the county at large. So I do support, and I'm happy to make a motion at the right time, Chair.
Supervisor Gallagher.
Chair, I'm wondering if I could just ask a question of Councilor
Certainly.
Broughton. The issue of the general plan language around Lake Berryessa, water and nature-based recreation area versus urban recreation area, I just want to make sure that we have, and I think I know the answer, the ability we will have to make sure that this proposal meets the demands of the general plan, correct? And so by entering into this negotiating agreement, that doesn't preclude our not only our ability but our responsibility to make sure that whatever we do complies with the general plan.
That's correct. The board will need to have a finding ultimately that the project complies with the general plan, and look at the environmental document as well. So the board will have ample opportunity to approve this project or deny it.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
If I could add to that, though, and I'm not disagreeing with council at all, but we also do have to remember this is federal land. This is not land that the county has zoned or general planned. It's federal land, and through the record of decision, the feds have defined the allowable uses there, and we signed a management agreement with the feds to implement that plan. So I'm not in any way saying you don't have some discretion to modify, but we're not. It's not a typical discussion of use A landing in ag watershed, and does that meet policy, whatever. Again, this is federal land, and the uses are somewhat defined. So. Anyway.
Have we compared that to our general plan policies?
Well, again, this land is not zoned. It's not zoned by the general plan. It's not.
Yes, it is.
Please, if we could allow staff to comment.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, again, it's federal land, and the management agreement that we signed is what defines the uses. Now, again, the board has some discretion. If the board board decided they hated swimming pools and said, "Man, I'm good with that resort, but I don't want any swimming pools." We can talk to the developer, and maybe that would be a possibility, but it's different than land that is not federal land.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Supervisor Cottrell.
Thank you, Chair. I had a follow-up question. I think we've heard a little bit about a public comment about nature-based versus urban-based. So I was going to ask Lee if you could talk a little bit about how you're defining that in a concept like this. Although I think, Steve, I'm not clear if you're saying that designation, we shouldn't even be looking at that. So that's part A. And then part B, you mentioned what the initial build out there was before things were removed. And can you remind us of what those numbers were? And we know that we wanted to not do that same thing, but those were significantly higher.
I don't remember the numbers specifically, but speaking about Steel Canyon, if you drove, for instance, I guess it's Berry S. Knoxville Road. Actually, I'm thinking of Spanish Flat at that point. But if you looked at the resorts, and certainly there are pictures of them, there were mobile homes or RVs or whatever they were, literally side by side the entire shoreline. I mean, so we're talking, I don't know, 4 or 5 times the density of what we're talking about here. I mean, it was really dramatic density in those old resorts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board at this time? Supervisor Pedroza.
I'm happy to move that we advance the Lake Barrington Concessions exclusive negotiating agreement for Steel Canyon Resort area.
I'll second that, but I'd like to add in the recommendation to schedule not only the community meetings, but also a report back to the board. Maybe staff can make a recommendation every 6 months or something like that, quarter every 6 months.
Do you accept that amendment to your motion?
I do.
Okay. As amended, we have a motion by Supervisor Pedroza, a second by Supervisor Cottrell to include community meetings and reports back on a regular basis to not just staff, but to the board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Well, we are now through consent. Thank you, staff.